I never thought I'd be the woman sitting in an urgent care clinic at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night, watching blood seep through a makeshift bandage on my upper arm, while my 3-year-old son slept peacefully on my sister's lap in the waiting room. But there I was, trying to process how a simple family visit had turned into something that would change our lives forever. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how my mother-in-law's hatred finally boiled over into violence, and how I discovered the strength I never knew I had. Let me take you back to the beginning, because to truly understand what happened that night, you need to know the history between Eleanor and me. I met my husband David 7 years ago at a coffee shop in downtown Denver. He was this sweet, somewhat sheltered accountant who'd never really rebelled against anything in his life. I was working as a graphic designer at the time, with a few small tattoos that I kept hidden under professional clothing. We fell in love quickly. He was drawn to my creative spirit, and I loved his stability and kindness. When he proposed after 2 years of dating, I thought I'd found my happily ever after. The first time I met Eleanor should have been a warning sign. David had built up this meeting for weeks, telling me how important his mother's opinion was to him. She lived in a beautiful Victorian house in the suburbs, the kind with perfectly manicured gardens and not a single thing out of place. When she opened the door, her smile never quite reached her eyes as she looked me up and down. I was wearing a conservative dress, my tattoos covered, my naturally curly hair straightened and pulled back, but somehow she seemed to see right through all of it to something she didn't approve of. Dinner that night was painfully formal. Eleanor had prepared an elaborate meal, pot roast with all the traditional fixings, and spent the entire evening asking me pointed questions about my family, my education, my career goals. When she found out I'd been raised by a single mother, I saw something shift in her expression. She made a comment about broken homes producing broken people, then quickly laughed it off as a joke. David squeezed my hand under the table, but I could see he was uncomfortable too. Things remained cordially strained for the next few years. Eleanor was never overtly rude. She was far too refined for that. Instead, she wielded passive aggression like a finely honed weapon. She'd make little comments about my cooking, always comparing it unfavorably to her own. She'd buy me clothes for birthdays and Christmas that were nothing like my style, beige cardigans and pearl necklaces, and then act hurt when I didn't wear them. She'd plan family events on days she knew I had work commitments, then sigh dramatically about how career-focused young women just didn't understand the importance of family. The real turning point came about 5 years ago when I made a career change that would alter everything. I'd been working as a graphic designer, but my real passion had always been art. I'd been drawing since I was a child, finding solace in creating beautiful things during a somewhat chaotic childhood. A friend who owned a tattoo parlor had been encouraging me to apprentice with her, and after months of deliberation, I finally took the leap. When I told David, he was nothing but supportive. He knew how much art meant to me, and he loved that I was brave enough to pursue my passion. We decided to celebrate by him getting his first tattoo, a small compass on his forearm that I designed, symbolizing how we'd always find our way back to each other. I'll never forget how proud he looked, rolling up his sleeve to admire my work. Eleanor's reaction was something else entirely. We'd gone to Sunday dinner at her house, and David, still excited about his new ink, had rolled up his sleeves while helping clear the table. Eleanor dropped the plate she was holding. It shattered on her pristine kitchen floor, sending fragments of china across the tile. Her face went white, then red, and she actually started to cry. "How could you do this to me?" she wailed, grabbing David's arm and staring at the tattoo like it was a festering wound. "The body I gave you, the perfect skin I created, and you let her destroy it." David tried to calm her down, explaining that it was his choice, that he loved the tattoo, that it meant something special to him. But Eleanor wasn't listening. She turned on me with a venom I'd never seen before. "You!" she hissed. "You've corrupted him! You've taken my sweet, innocent boy and turned him into something I don't even recognize!" That night marked the beginning of a new phase in our relationship. Eleanor's passive aggression turned into active hostility. Though she was still careful to maintain plausible deniability, she'd make comments about tattoo artists being criminals and drug addicts. She'd send David articles about tattoo removal, about people who regretted their ink, about infections and diseases. When we announced my pregnancy a year later, she actually asked David if he was sure the baby was his, since women in that industry tend to be promiscuous. David, to his credit, started standing up to her more. He'd shut down her comments, change the subject, sometimes even leave early when she got too nasty. But he also believed in keeping the peace, in family harmony. He'd been raised to respect his elders, to maintain relationships no matter what. So we kept visiting, kept subjecting ourselves to her increasingly toxic behavior, because that's what families do, right? Our son Lucas was born 3 years ago, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe a grandchild would soften Eleanor. She seemed genuinely happy at the hospital, holding him with tears in her eyes, calling him perfect. But that honeymoon period lasted about a week. Soon she was criticizing my parenting choices. I was holding him too much, not enough, feeding him wrong, using the wrong diapers, putting him down for naps at the wrong time. Nothing I did was right. As I built my career as a tattoo artist, developing my own style and gaining a steady clientele, Eleanor's resentment grew. David got more tattoos, a sleeve depicting scenes from his favorite books, a portrait of Lucas on his chest. Each new piece of ink seemed to personally offend Eleanor, as if we were doing it specifically to hurt her. She'd make dramatic speeches about how she'd failed as a mother, how she didn't understand where she went wrong, how David was breaking her heart. The thing is, outside of Eleanor, our life was good. Really good. I loved my job, creating art that people would carry with them forever. David had gotten a promotion at his accounting firm. Lucas was a happy, energetic little boy who loved dinosaurs and finger painting. We'd bought a small house. Actually, we rented it from Eleanor, which I know now was a huge mistake, but at the time the price was too good to pass up. It was on the same property as her house, separated by a thick grove of trees and a fence, but still just a 5-minute drive away. Looking back, I can see all the red flags I ignored, the way Eleanor would drop by unannounced using her landlord status as an excuse, the way she'd undermine my parenting when she babysat, giving Lucas sweets I'd said no to, letting him stay up past bedtime, then acting innocent when I confronted her. The way she'd make little comments to David about how tired he looked, how stressed, always implying that I was somehow to blame. But we adapt to toxicity, don't we? We normalize it, make excuses, tell ourselves it's not that bad. We focus on the good moments and minimize the bad ones. We tell ourselves we're being too sensitive, that we're overreacting, that keeping the peace is more important than our own comfort. That's what I did for years, right up until that Saturday night when everything changed. It had been a relatively calm few weeks. Eleanor had been distant but not actively hostile, and David thought maybe she was finally accepting our life choices. Lucas had been begging to play on the elaborate jungle gym in her backyard. She'd had it installed when he was born, one of those expensive wooden structures with swings and slides and a climbing wall. Despite my reservations, we agreed to visit. When we arrived, Eleanor seemed almost pleasant. She smiled when she saw Lucas, ruffling his hair and telling him how big he was getting. She'd ordered Chinese food from our favorite restaurant, remembering that I liked extra vegetables and my lo mein. We sat in her living room, making small talk while Lucas played with some toys she'd set out for him. That's when Frank, David's stepfather, pulled out his phone. Frank had always been the buffer between Eleanor and the rest of us, a quiet, mild-mannered man who'd learned long ago that the path of least resistance was the only way to survive in that house. "Hey, Sarah," he said, showing me his phone screen. "What do you think of this?" It was a photo of an incredibly detailed Japanese-style dragon tattoo, all flowing lines and delicate shading. The artistry was exceptional, the kind of work that takes years to master. "It's gorgeous," I said honestly. "The detail in the scales is incredible." "Think you could do something like that?" Frank asked, a hopeful note in his voice. I studied the image more carefully. It was done in a very specific style called tebori, which requires different techniques than what I usually did. I believe in being honest with my clients, even potential ones. "Not in this exact style," I admitted. "This is tebori work. See how the shading has that particular quality? It's not something I'm trained in. But if you gave me some time to practice the technique, I'd be happy to try once I feel confident I could do it justice." That's when Eleanor, who'd been puttering around in the kitchen, made her presence known. "Of course you can't," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Just another reminder of what a bad influence you are on this family." I should have left it alone. I should have just ignored her like I'd learned to do. But something about her tone, the way she said it in front of Frank and David and even Lucas, who was listening from the corner where he was playing, made me snap back. "Yeah, well," I said, trying for a joking tone, "being a bad influence kind of comes with the territory, I guess. I stab people for a living." It was meant to be self-deprecating humor, the kind of joke I made with clients all the time. But the moment the words left my mouth, I saw something change in Eleanor's face. Her eyes went hard and bright, and her jaw clenched. She was standing by the fireplace where she'd been adjusting decorations, and in her hand was one of those long metal skewers used for roasting marshmallows or hot dogs over a fire. What happened next seemed to occur in slow motion, though David later told me it was so fast he almost didn't process it. Eleanor whirled around, the skewer raised, and before anyone could react, she'd crossed the room and driven it into my upper arm. The pain was immediate and shocking. Not just the physical pain of being stabbed, but the psychological shock of being attacked by someone in what should have been a safe space. I jumped up, screaming, my hand going instinctively to my arm. I could feel something wet and warm. Blood, my mind registered distantly, and there was dirt and ash from the fireplace tools ground into the wound. The room erupted into chaos. David was on his feet, yelling something I couldn't make out over the ringing in my ears. Lucas started crying, that frightened wail of a child who knows something bad has happened but doesn't understand what. Frank grabbed Eleanor, pulling her back, and she still had the skewer in her hand, looking at it like she didn't understand how it had gotten there. "Oh my God," Frank kept saying over and over. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Why would you do that? I'm so sorry. Please don't call the police. I'm going to. Are you okay? Oh my God." Eleanor let Frank guide her into the house and she never said a word. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement of what she'd just done. She just walked away, leaving me bleeding in her living room while my son sobbed in the corner. David grabbed kitchen towels, pressing them against my arm while trying to corral Lucas at the same time. His face was white with shock and anger, an expression I'd never seen before. "We're leaving," he said, his voice shaking. "Right now. Can you walk to the car?" I nodded, though I felt dizzy and disconnected from my body. David scooped up Lucas, who wrapped his arms around his father's neck and buried his face in his shoulder, still crying. We made it to the car somehow, David buckling Lucas into his car seat while I held the makeshift bandage against my arm. Frank had followed us out, still apologizing, begging us not to involve the authorities. He looked terrified. Not of us, I realized, but of Eleanor and what she might do next. As we pulled away, I saw him standing in the driveway, shoulders slumped, looking older than I'd ever seen him. The drive home was silent except for Lucas's sniffles. David's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and he kept glancing at me like he was afraid I might disappear. When we pulled into our driveway, he turned to me. "I'm going to go talk to her," he said. "Find out what the hell that was about." "David, no! I need to know why she did it. I need to hear her say it." He helped me inside, settling me on the couch with Lucas curled up beside me. I examined the wound properly for the first time. It wasn't deep, maybe a quarter inch, but it was dirty, and the violation of it made my stomach turn. This woman, who'd made my life difficult for years, had actually attacked me, had actually drawn blood. David was gone for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. When he came back, his face was grim. "She said she was just going to poke you," he reported, sinking into the chair across from me. "To show you how it feels since you said you stab people. She claims she didn't know her own strength." "That's bullshit," I said flatly. "I know." He rubbed his face with both hands. "Dad kept going on about how she has the flu, how she's not thinking clearly. Mom just sat there looking, I don't know, smug almost." That's when things took a turn I didn't expect. David, my peacekeeping, harmony-loving husband, suddenly switched gears. "You need to forgive her," he said. "Call her. Talk it out. She's my mother, Sarah. She made a mistake." I stared at him, wondering if I was hallucinating from shock. She stabbed me, David, with a dirty fire poker, in front of our son. It was barely a scratch. You're overreacting." "Overreacting?" My voice rose, and Lucas whimpered against my side. "Your mother assaulted me, and I'm overreacting?" What followed was the ugliest fight of our marriage. David actually threatened to take Lucas and go stay with Eleanor if I didn't call her and smooth things over. He stood there in our living room, the man I'd loved for 7 years, the father of my child, and took his mother's side after she'd physically attacked me. That's when I knew I needed help. Real help, not the Band-Aid solutions we'd been applying to Eleanor's behavior for years. I called my sister Rebecca, trying to keep my voice steady as I explained what had happened. "Pack a bag," she said immediately. "I'm on my way." Rebecca arrived in 15 minutes flat, taking in the scene with the efficiency of an emergency room nurse, which she was. She looked at my arm, at David's defensive posture, at Lucas's tear-stained face, and made a decision. "We're going to urgent care," she announced. "That needs to be looked at by a professional." "It's fine," David protested. "You're all overreacting." Rebecca rounded on him with a fury I'd rarely seen. "Your wife was attacked with a dirty weapon. Your son watched his grandmother stab his mother. And you're worried about overreacting? What's wrong with you?" She bundled Lucas and me into her car while David stood on the porch, looking lost. As we drove away, my phone started buzzing. Eleanor had found her voice, apparently, and was texting me repeatedly. Not apologies, never apologies, but justifications. How I'd provoked her. How I needed to understand her perspective. How David was devastated by my selfishness in leaving. At urgent care, the wound was cleaned and assessed. 2 stitches, a tetanus shot, and antibiotics to prevent infection from the fireplace debris. The doctor asked how it happened, and when I hesitantly explained, she called for the on-site security officer. "This is assault," she said firmly. "You need to file a report." The security officer, a bored-looking man in his 50s, barely glanced at my bandaged arm. "Sounds like a family dispute," he said. "These things happen. Maybe she really didn't mean to hurt you that bad." I wanted to scream. A stranger had just dismissed Eleanor's violence the same way David had, the way I'd been dismissing her emotional violence for years. But Rebecca wasn't having it. "Would you say that if it wasn't her mother-in-law?" she demanded. "If a stranger had stabbed her with a fire poker, would it still be just a family dispute?" The officer sighed and gave us information about filing a report at the actual police station. It was clear he thought we were wasting everyone's time. Rebecca took Lucas and me to her apartment, a cozy 2-bedroom in a building with good security. Lucas fell asleep on her couch, exhausted from the emotional upheaval. That's when I finally broke down, sobbing into my sister's shoulder as the reality of everything hit me. "I can't go back there," I whispered. "Not while she lives right there. Not while David thinks this is okay." "Then you don't," Rebecca said simply. "You and Lucas stay here as long as you need. We'll figure out the rest." My phone continued buzzing with messages from both David and Eleanor. David's ranged from apologetic to angry to pleading. Eleanor's were increasingly unhinged, talking about how I was destroying the family, how I was keeping her grandson from her, how I needed to stop being so dramatic. Around midnight, David showed up at Rebecca's building, buzzing the intercom repeatedly. Rebecca answered, telling him firmly that I wasn't ready to talk and he needed to leave. He buzzed several more times before finally giving up. The next morning, I woke up on Rebecca's couch with a throbbing arm and a heavy heart. Lucas was curled up next to me, and I watched him sleep, wondering how to protect him from all of this. My phone battery had died overnight. A blessing, really. But when I charged it, I found dozens of missed calls and over 50 text messages. Most were from David and Eleanor, but there were also messages from David's relatives. Somehow, Eleanor had mobilized the family overnight, painting me as the villain who was breaking up the family over a tiny accident. The narrative was already being written. Sarah had always been too sensitive, too dramatic. Sarah had never really fit in. Sarah was keeping poor Eleanor from her grandchild over nothing, but there were also messages of support. David's cousin Melissa, who'd had her own run-ins with Eleanor, texted to say she believed me and was sorry this had happened. A couple of my regular clients who followed me on social media had seen a vague post I'd made about family drama and offered support. My boss at the tattoo shop told me to take as much time as I needed. I decided to document everything. Rebecca helped me take photos of the wound, the bloodied clothes, the messages. We wrote down everything we could remember about the incident while it was still fresh. If Eleanor and David wanted to gaslight me, I was going to have evidence of the truth. That afternoon, while Lucas was napping, I made a decision that would prove to be one of the best I'd ever make. I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but one who specialized in family law and domestic violence cases. Her name was Patricia Chen, and she listened to my story with a calm professionalism that made me feel heard for the first time in days. "First things first," Patricia said. "We need to get you a restraining order. The assault, combined with the harassment via text, should be enough. Second, you need to think about your living situation. You rent from her?" I explained about the house on Eleanor's property, how we'd thought it was such a good deal, how it had seemed like a way to save money for Lucas's future. "That needs to change immediately," Patricia said. "She has too much control over your living situation. And your husband, is he supportive of you taking legal action?" I had to admit that no, David was actively opposed to involving law enforcement or lawyers. He'd grown up being told that family matters stayed in the family, that involving outsiders was a betrayal. "That's going to be the problem," Patricia said gently. "You need to think about whether your marriage can survive if he continues to choose his mother over your safety and that of your child." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on Eleanor that I hadn't fully processed what David's reaction meant for our marriage. He'd watched his mother attack me and chosen to defend her. He'd threatened to take our son to her house if I didn't comply with his wishes. What did that say about him? About us? Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. David would cycle through different approaches, apologizing for his initial reaction, promising to support me, then immediately backtracking when Eleanor got to him. He'd show up at Rebecca's apartment with flowers and Lucas's favorite toys, swearing he understood now, that he'd set boundaries with his mother. Then Eleanor would call him crying, and he'd be texting me an hour later about how we needed to be reasonable, how she was just a sick old woman who made a mistake. Eleanor, meanwhile, had gone into full victim mode. According to the family grapevine, she'd taken to her bed, claiming to be suicidal over the thought of losing her son and grandson. She'd called her pastor, her book club, anyone who would listen, spinning a tale of how her ungrateful daughter-in-law was persecuting her over an accident. She'd even started posting on social media, sharing articles about forgiveness and family unity, each post a subtle dig at me. The breaking point came when Eleanor decided to escalate beyond emotional manipulation. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I'd finally gone back to work, needing the normalcy and the income. Lucas was with Rebecca, who'd taken time off to help us. I was in the middle of working on a delicate floral piece on a client's shoulder when the shop phone rang. My boss answered, and I watched her face go from confused to angry. She put the call on hold and came over to me. "There's someone claiming to be a lawyer, saying you need to cease all business operations immediately due to a legal matter," she said. "This has to do with your mother-in-law situation, doesn't it?" My client, bless her, told me to take my time sorting it out. I took the call in the back office, my hands shaking. The woman on the phone identified herself as Eleanor's attorney and launched into a clearly rehearsed speech about how I was guilty of elder abuse, alienation of affection, and various other legal-sounding accusations. She demanded I return to the family home immediately with Lucas, cease my campaign of harassment against Eleanor, and submit to mediation to resolve the family dispute. Something about her tone was off, though. She sounded nervous, uncertain, not like any lawyer I'd ever dealt with. On a hunch, I asked for her bar number. There was a long pause. "I don't have to provide that information to you," she said finally. "Actually, you do," I said, remembering something Patricia had told me. "If you're representing Eleanor in a legal capacity, I have the right to verify your credentials." The line went dead. I immediately called Patricia, who was furious. Impersonating a lawyer was a crime, and this showed a level of escalation that concerned her. We decided to go to the police station that afternoon to file not just a report about the assault, but also about the ongoing harassment and impersonation. The police station was an exercise in frustration. The officer we spoke to, a young man who looked barely out of college, kept trying to minimize everything. It was just a family dispute. These things happen. Maybe we should try counseling. It wasn't until Patricia pointed out the legal implications of the false lawyer call that he started taking us seriously. Even then, he insisted it was a civil matter until Patricia pulled out the state statute showing that impersonating a bar-registered attorney was indeed a criminal offense. Grudgingly, he agreed to send an officer to warn Eleanor about further contact. What happened next, I learned secondhand from various sources, including Frank, who called me later in tears to apologize and explain. The police visit to Eleanor didn't go well. She first denied knowing anything about the lawyer call, then claimed she'd simply had a friend call to mediate. When pressed, she stuck to her story even when the officer told her they had evidence otherwise. After the police left, Eleanor spiraled. She started drinking, something she rarely did, and calling family members, ranting about how I'd sent the police after her like she was a common criminal. Her sister Grace, who'd always enabled Eleanor's worst impulses, came over and the two of them worked each other into a frenzy. Around 11 that night, Eleanor made a crucial mistake. Drunk and furious, she decided to call my mother, except she dialed the wrong number and got no answer. This perceived slight, my mother ignoring her call, sent her over the edge. She locked herself in the bathroom, threatening to end her life if she couldn't see Lucas before midnight. Now, this wasn't the first time Eleanor had threatened self-harm to get her way. It was a manipulation tactic she'd used before, usually successfully. The person on the other side of the door would plead with her, beg her to come out, promise her whatever she wanted. But Grace, drunk herself and tired of the drama, did something unexpected. She called 911. When the paramedics and police arrived, Eleanor had to come out of the bathroom and face the consequences of her threat. In our state, threats of self-harm result in a mandatory psychiatric hold. Eleanor was taken to the hospital for evaluation, screaming the whole way about how this was my fault, how I'd driven her to this. The psychiatric hold was enlightening. Without her echo chamber of enablers, forced to speak with actual mental health professionals, Eleanor's carefully constructed victim narrative began to fall apart. The doctor saw through her manipulation tactics and recommended intensive outpatient therapy. She was released after 24 hours to Frank's care, with strict instructions to stay away from me and Lucas. You'd think that would be the end of it, but Eleanor wasn't done. Unable to contact me directly, she began a campaign of harassment by proxy. Flying monkeys, as Patricia called them, people she sent to do her bidding. David's aunts would show up at Rebecca's building. Cousins would accidentally run into me at the grocery store. Everyone had the same message. Eleanor was sorry. Eleanor was suffering. Eleanor just wanted to see her grandson. Couldn't I find it in my heart to forgive? The answer was no. No, I couldn't forgive someone who'd physically attacked me and then tried to destroy my life when I wouldn't pretend it hadn't happened. No, I couldn't trust someone who'd shown such a capacity for violence and manipulation around my child. No. I couldn't continue to sacrifice my safety and sanity on the altar of family harmony. David and I were at an impasse. He couldn't fully let go of his mother, and I couldn't go back to a life where her feelings mattered more than my safety. We started marriage counseling, but it quickly became clear that David had been so enmeshed with Eleanor for so long that he couldn't see how toxic the situation was. He'd make progress in sessions, agreeing that his mother's behavior was unacceptable, then backslide the moment she contacted him with tears and guilt trips. The restraining order was granted, valid for 1 year with the possibility of renewal. Eleanor was legally barred from contacting me or Lucas, from coming to our workplaces or schools, from having any third party contact us on her behalf. You'd think that would stop her, but restraining orders only work on people who respect the law. 2 weeks after the order was granted, on a sunny Tuesday morning that had started like any other, things escalated again. I'd enrolled Lucas in a small preschool to give him some normalcy and socialization. Rebecca and I had carefully vetted the school, making sure they understood the situation with Eleanor and had proper security measures in place. I was at work, carefully outlining a memorial tattoo for a client who'd lost her sister, when my phone rang. It was the preschool director, and her voice was carefully controlled. "Sarah, I need you to know that Lucas is safe," she began, which immediately sent my heart racing. But we had an incident. A woman claiming to be his grandmother tried to pick him up. When we explained she wasn't on the authorized list, she became agitated. I was already grabbing my keys, my client understanding immediately when I explained I had a family emergency. As I drove to the preschool, the director filled me in. Eleanor had shown up at pickup time with a gift bag, telling the staff that there had been a misunderstanding, and she was supposed to collect Lucas for a special grandmother-grandson day. When they'd refused, following the protocol we'd established, she'd begun causing a scene. She'd accused them of kidnapping, of alienating her from her grandson. She'd tried to push past the staff to get to the playground where Lucas was playing. It was only when they'd threatened to call the police that she'd left, but not before throwing the gift bag at the director and screaming that I was a monster who was poisoning her grandson against her. By the time I arrived, the police were already there. The preschool had security cameras that had captured everything, including Eleanor's license plate as she'd peeled out of the parking lot. Lucas, thankfully, had been inside during the confrontation and was unaware of what had happened. He was playing with blocks when I scooped him up, burying my face in his hair and trying not to cry. The security footage was damning. It showed Eleanor clearly violating the restraining order, attempting to access Lucas despite being legally barred from doing so. The police officer, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, took it seriously. "This is a clear violation," she said. "We'll be arresting her today." And they did. Eleanor was arrested at her home that evening, charged with violating a restraining order. She spent the night in jail before Frank bailed her out. The family explosion was immediate and intense. My phone rang non-stop with relatives calling me every name in the book. How could I have an old woman arrested? Didn't I have any compassion? What kind of monster keeps a grandmother from her grandson? But something had shifted in me. Maybe it was seeing her try to take Lucas from his school. Maybe it was the accumulation of months of harassment. Maybe it was just finally reaching my limit. But I was done caring what they thought. I was done prioritizing their comfort over our safety. I was done being the bigger person. Patricia was proud of me. "This is what it takes," she said. "Consistent consequences. She's learning that you're not going to fold." David, on the other hand, was devastated. He came to Rebecca's apartment, looking haggard and years older than his 32 years. "She's my mother," he said, as if that explained and excused everything. "She spent a night in jail because of you." "She spent a night in jail because of her own actions," I corrected. "She tried to kidnap our son, David. What if they'd given him to her? What if she'd run?" "She would never—" "I thought she'd never stab me either," I interrupted. "But here we are." That conversation was the beginning of the end for us. David couldn't see past his mother's manipulation, couldn't prioritize his wife and child over his need for her approval. We started divorce proceedings a week later. It was surprisingly civil. David didn't want custody of Lucas, claiming he wasn't equipped to be a single parent. I think the truth was that having Lucas full-time would interfere with his ability to cater to Eleanor's needs. The divorce negotiations revealed some interesting things. David had been having an affair with a coworker for months, finding solace with someone who didn't challenge his family dynamics. He wanted my blessing to pursue the relationship openly. I gave it gladly. I felt nothing but relief that he'd found someone else to disappoint when he chose his mother over his partner. As the divorce proceeded, I started rebuilding my life. Lucas and I found a small apartment on the other side of town, far from Eleanor's sphere of influence. I threw myself into my work, building my reputation as an artist. I even started dating again, cautiously, with a new understanding of red flags and the importance of boundaries. One evening, about a month after Eleanor's arrest, I went on a date with Marcus, a teacher I'd met through a mutual friend. He was kind and funny, with an easy smile and no toxic family members in sight. We had dinner at a nice Italian place, then walked to a nearby bar for drinks. It was the first time in months I'd felt like a normal person, not someone constantly looking over their shoulder. Marcus walked me back to my car in the parking garage, kissing me softly on the cheek before saying goodnight. We made plans for lunch later that week. I was smiling as he walked away, feeling hopeful for the first time in ages. That's when I saw her. Eleanor, running toward my car, her face twisted with rage. I fumbled for my keys, managing to get inside and lock the doors just as she reached me. She pounded on the passenger window, screaming accusations. "I knew it! You whore! You're out with men while my son suffers! Adultery is illegal! You're going to lose everything!" I called 911, trying to stay calm as Eleanor raged outside. She kicked my door, leaving a dent, and kept screaming about what a terrible mother I was, how she was going to make sure Lucas was raised right, how I was destroying the family with my selfish behavior. The police arrived quickly, and Eleanor made the mistake of trying to argue her case to them. She reeked of alcohol and admitted she'd been following me, waiting for me to slip up so she could prove I was an unfit mother. She actually thought the officers would take her side when she explained about the adultery. Instead, they arrested her again. This time, when they searched her car with her consent, she was so drunk she eagerly agreed, thinking they'd find evidence against me. They found something chilling. A notebook filled with my schedule, Lucas's school routine, details about when he'd be outside for recess or lunch. It was clear she'd been stalking us for weeks, possibly planning something worse than just confrontation. That notebook changed everything. This wasn't just a grandmother wanting to see her grandson. This was a dangerous obsession that put both Lucas and me at risk. Eleanor had essentially admitted to planning a kidnapping, and even her most ardent supporters in the family couldn't defend that. She spent 5 nights in jail this time before Frank could arrange bail. The conditions of her release were strict. No contact with us, no going near our home, work, or Lucas's school, and mandatory mental health treatment. Patricia pushed for the most restrictive terms possible, and the judge, seeing the pattern of escalation, agreed. You might think this would be rock bottom for Eleanor, that she'd finally realized she needed help. But narcissists don't hit rock bottom the way normal people do. They just dig deeper holes. Upon her release, she began a new campaign, playing the victim to anyone who would listen. She joined online support groups for alienated grandparents, spinning tales of how her evil daughter-in-law had stolen her family. She found a therapist who believed her version of events and used the sessions to validate her behavior rather than challenge it. Meanwhile, Lucas and I were trying to build a new normal. I'd pulled him from preschool after the incident, and my Aunt Helen, a retired teacher, agreed to homeschool him while we figured out our next steps. Lucas was resilient, as children often are. But he'd started having nightmares and asking why Grandma was so angry all the time. I found a child psychologist who specialized in family trauma. Dr. Martinez was wonderful with Lucas, using play therapy to help him process what had happened. It broke my heart when Lucas acted out the stabbing incident with dolls, having the grandmother doll hurt the mommy doll while the daddy doll just watched. But Dr. Martinez assured me that this was healthy. He was working through his feelings in a safe space. The divorce was finalized on a rainy Thursday in November. David didn't even show up to court, sending his lawyer instead. He'd already moved in with his girlfriend and seemed relieved to be free of the complications I represented. He signed away his parental rights without a fight, agreeing to child support but wanting no visitation. It stung, but it also simplified things. Lucas and I were truly on our own now, free to build a life without the constant threat of Eleanor's influence through David. Winter came early that year, blanketing Denver in snow by Thanksgiving. I'd decided to start new traditions with Lucas, free from the toxic dynamics of previous holidays. We spent Thanksgiving with Rebecca and her partner, making turkey handprint crafts and watching the parade. It was peaceful and perfect, right up until the doorbell rang that evening. No one was supposed to be visiting. Rebecca lived in a secure building where you needed to be buzzed in, but there on her doorstep was a delivery, 5 boxes wrapped in shiny paper, addressed to Lucas by name. The handwriting wasn't Eleanor's, but I knew immediately they were from her. Inside one box was a note in unfamiliar handwriting, gushing about how much the sender loved Lucas, how precious and sweet he was, how he should know he could always come to them if he needed anything. It was signed Grandma Eleanor, but again, not in her handwriting. The security footage from Rebecca's building showed the truth. Grace, Eleanor's sister, had delivered the boxes. When the police confronted her, she initially played dumb, then admitted Eleanor had asked her to deliver gifts because the restraining order doesn't say other people can't give him presents from her. She genuinely believed she'd found a loophole. The officers explained that facilitating contact on behalf of someone with a restraining order was illegal. Grace broke down crying, finally understanding she could face charges. Eleanor, When confronted, first denied everything, then admitted to orchestrating the gift delivery but insisted she hadn't done anything wrong since she hadn't personally contacted us. This time, the judge had no patience for her games. Eleanor was arrested and held for 5 nights before being released with even stricter conditions. Another violation would result in significant jail time. The family finally began to understand that I wasn't bluffing, wasn't going to fold under pressure. Some quietly reached out to express support, admitting they'd been too afraid of Eleanor's wrath to speak up before. Christmas came and went peacefully. Lucas and I decorated a small tree in our apartment, made cookies for neighbors, and spent the day in our pajamas watching movies. David sent a generic card with a check, no personal message, no gift for Lucas, just money and a signature. Eleanor was conspicuously silent, finally seeming to understand that contact meant consequences. But I knew it wasn't over. People like Eleanor don't just give up. They regroup, they plan, they wait for you to let your guard down. I installed security cameras in our apartment, varied our routines, stayed vigilant. Patricia warned me that extinction bursts, the last desperate attempts of an abuser to regain control, could be extreme. She was right. In late January, on a day when the sun was shining and the snow was melting, I thought maybe we'd finally found peace. Lucas and I had been to the park, then stopped for hot chocolate at his favorite cafe. We were laughing about something, I can't even remember what now, when I noticed a familiar car following us. It wasn't Eleanor's car, but I recognized it as belonging to one of David's cousins. I took several random turns, and the car stayed with us. My heart racing, I drove to the nearest police station and parked in front. The car sped away, but I'd gotten the license plate. When I reported it, the officer taking my statement recognized our case file. "This family really doesn't learn, do they?" she said, shaking her head. The cousin was questioned and admitted Eleanor had asked him to check on Lucas and me to see if we were okay. He claimed he didn't know about the restraining order, but text messages on his phone proved otherwise. Eleanor had been coordinating surveillance on us through family members, careful not to directly violate the order herself. This pattern continued for months. Different family members would accidentally show up where we were. Photos of Lucas and me would appear on Eleanor's social media, clearly taken without our knowledge. Each time we'd report it. Each time the family member would claim ignorance or accident. It was exhausting, this constant vigilance, this never knowing when we were being watched. The breaking point came in March. I'd started feeling safer, letting my guard down just a little. Marcus and I had been dating steadily, and he'd met Lucas a few times in casual settings. We were building something good, something healthy. I'd even started thinking about the future again, about possibilities beyond just surviving each day. That's when Eleanor made her final, most desperate move. I don't know if it was seeing me happy that triggered her, or if she'd been planning it all along. But on a Wednesday afternoon, while Lucas was at a play date with a friend from his homeschool group and I was at work, she struck. I was working on a memorial piece, a portrait of someone's beloved grandfather, when my phone rang. It was the mother hosting the play date, and she sounded frantic. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I don't know how it happened. One minute the kids were in the backyard, and the next, Lucas is gone." The world stopped. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Lucas was gone. My baby was gone. "The back gate was open," she continued, crying now. "We've looked everywhere. I've called the police. Sarah, I'm so sorry." I don't remember driving to her house. I don't remember anything except the terror, the absolute certainty that Eleanor had taken him. The police were already there when I arrived, and I immediately told them about Eleanor, about the restraining order, about her documented plans to take Lucas. An Amber Alert was issued. Eleanor's photo was distributed to every law enforcement agency in the state. Her house was searched, but she wasn't there. Frank, destroyed by the news, admitted she'd left that morning saying she had errands to run. He'd noticed she'd taken a large bag, but hadn't thought anything of it. Those were the longest 3 hours of my life. I sat in that living room, surrounded by police officers and terrified parents, waiting for news. Rebecca arrived and held me while I sobbed. Marcus came straight from school, still in his teaching clothes. Even David showed up, looking genuinely frightened for the first time since this whole nightmare began. Then, a miracle. A gas station attendant 2 towns over recognized Eleanor from the Amber Alert. She was in the bathroom with a small boy who was crying for his mommy. The attendant called 911, then stood guard by the door until police arrived. They found Lucas scared but unharmed. Eleanor had told him they were going on a special adventure, but when he realized I wasn't coming, he'd started crying and hadn't stopped. She'd bought him toys and candy, but nothing could console him. He just wanted his mommy. When the police confronted Eleanor in that gas station bathroom, she was defiant. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She was saving Lucas from a neglectful mother. She had rights as a grandmother. Didn't they understand that everything she'd done was out of love? This time, there was no bail. Eleanor was charged with kidnapping, violating a restraining order, child endangerment, and several other offenses. The notebook found in her car months earlier was evidence of premeditation. Family members who'd helped her surveil us were charged as accessories. The whole network of enablers came crashing down. I'll never forget the moment they brought Lucas back to me. He ran into my arms, clinging to me like he'd never let go, repeating, "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy," over and over. We both cried, holding each other in that police station while chaos swirled around us. He was safe. He was home. That was all that mattered. The trial was a media circus. Grandmother kidnaps grandchild in custody dispute made for sensational headlines. Eleanor's lawyer tried to paint her as a concerned grandmother, driven to desperation by cruel daughter-in-law, but the evidence was overwhelming. The stabbing, the stalking, the escalating violations of the restraining order, the premeditated kidnapping, it painted a picture of someone dangerously obsessed, not a loving grandmother. Eleanor was sentenced to 5 years in prison with the possibility of parole in 3. At her sentencing, she was given the opportunity to speak. Instead of showing remorse, she launched into a tirade about how I'd destroyed her family, how Lucas would grow up damaged without her influence, how this was all my fault for being too sensitive about a little poke with a fire tool. The judge cut her off, noting that her complete lack of accountability or remorse justified the maximum sentence. As they led her away, she was still ranting about her rights as a grandmother. Frank divorced her while she was in prison. He'd stood by her through everything, but kidnapping Lucas was too much, even for him. He sent me a long letter apologizing for not protecting us, for enabling Eleanor's behavior for so long. He asked if he could have supervised visits with Lucas someday, when we were ready. I told him, maybe, in time, if he continued with the therapy he'd started. David disappeared entirely after the trial. His girlfriend left him when she realized what kind of family she'd gotten involved with. Last I heard, he'd moved to another state, starting over where no one knew his story. He sends child support checks, but nothing else. Lucas doesn't ask about him anymore. It's been 2 years now since that night in the urgent care clinic. 2 years since a family dinner turned into a nightmare that upended our entire lives. Lucas is 5 now. A bright, resilient little boy who loves dinosaurs and painting and his Aunt Rebecca. He's in regular school with friends and teachers who adore him. The nightmares have stopped thanks to continued therapy and the security of knowing the bad things are really over. I'm still with Marcus. He stood by us through the trial, through the aftermath, through the hard work of healing. He's never once suggested I should forgive and forget, never implied I was being too harsh. He understands that protecting Lucas and myself isn't about holding grudges. It's about maintaining boundaries with someone who proved themselves dangerous. My business is thriving. The notoriety from the trial actually brought me clients who appreciated that I was a survivor, that I'd fought for my child against incredible pressure. I specialize now in memorial tattoos and pieces that commemorate survival and strength. Every design I create is infused with the knowledge that we can endure more than we think we can. Eleanor will be eligible for parole next year. Patricia is already preparing our impact statements, ready to argue against her release. Prison hasn't reformed her. Her letters to family members, she's not allowed to contact us, show she still believes she's the victim. She's found religion, but only as another tool to manipulate, claiming God has forgiven her even if we haven't. Sometimes I wonder how different things might have been if David had stood up to her that first time she criticized me. If he'd set boundaries when she made that comment about broken homes, if either of us had recognized the warning signs and acted on them instead of keeping the peace. But you can't change the past. You can only learn from it. I've learned that when someone shows you who they are, believe them. I've learned that family isn't about blood, it's about who shows up for you when things get hard. I've learned that protecting your child isn't negotiable no matter who you're protecting them from. And I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no and mean it. People sometimes ask me if I regret how things turned out, if I wish I'd handled it differently, been more forgiving, tried harder to make it work. The scar on my arm has faded to a thin white line, barely noticeable among my tattoos. But I remember the shock of that skewer piercing my skin, the moment when emotional violence became physical. I remember Lucas's terrified face in that police station. I remember the price of keeping the peace. So no, I don't regret it. I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret protecting us. Eleanor made her choices, and they had consequences. That's not cruelty, that's justice. And maybe, just maybe, other women in similar situations will hear our story and realize they don't have to accept being stabbed, literally or figuratively, for the sake of family harmony. As I write this, Lucas is asleep in his room, safe and loved and protected. Tomorrow he has a play date with friends. This weekend we're going camping with Marcus and Rebecca. Life is normal in all the ways that matter. We're not looking over our shoulders anymore. We're not afraid. We're free. And that freedom? It was worth every difficult decision, every family relationship lost, every moment of doubt. Because at the end of the day, the only approval that matters is the face of my son, trusting me to keep him safe. And I did. Despite everything, I did. That's the story of how my mother-in-law stabbed me, and somehow for a while, I was treated like the bad guy. But it's also the story of how I found my strength, protected my child, and built a life free from toxic people who believe their feelings matter more than our safety. It's a story of survival and boundaries and the kind of love that does what's necessary even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. If you're listening to this and any of it sounds familiar, if you're sitting there making excuses for someone who hurts you, if you're telling yourself it's not that bad or that family is family no matter what, I want you to know something. Your safety matters. Your child's safety matters. Your mental health matters. And anyone who truly loves you would never ask you to sacrifice those things for their comfort. I think about the woman I was 7 years ago, walking into Eleanor's perfect house in my conservative dress, trying so hard to be what she wanted. I was so eager to please, so willing to bend myself into whatever shape would make me acceptable. I thought that if I just tried hard enough, loved hard enough, forgave enough, I could make it work. I thought that family harmony was worth any price. But here's what I learned in the hardest possible way. Some prices are too high to pay. The price of my physical safety was too high. The price of my son's security was too high. The price of living in constant fear and walking on eggshells was too high. No relationship, no family connection, no societal expectation is worth sacrificing your fundamental well-being. The thing about toxic people, especially toxic family members, is that they count on your good nature. They count on your desire to keep the peace, your fear of conflict, your internalized belief that family comes first no matter what. They use these good qualities against you, weaponizing your own kindness to keep you trapped in cycles of abuse. Eleanor knew exactly what she was doing. Every tear, every guilt trip, every manipulation was calculated to keep us in line. She'd learned over decades that if she just pushed hard enough, cried loud enough, threatened dramatically enough, people would give in, and for years it worked. David gave in. Frank gave in. The whole family gave in. I gave in too, over and over again, until that night she crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Physical violence has a way of clarifying things. When someone actually hurts you, physically attacks you, it's harder to make excuses. You can't tell yourself you're being too sensitive when there's literal blood on your shirt. You can't convince yourself it's not that bad when you're getting stitches. But even then, look how many people tried to minimize it. David, the police, even that first security officer at the hospital, they all wanted to believe it wasn't serious, that it was just a family dispute, that I should let it go. This is what we're up against when we try to protect ourselves from family abuse. Not just the abuser, but an entire system designed to preserve family units at any cost. A system that tells us forgiveness is always the answer, that blood is thicker than water, that we should respect our elders no matter how they treat us. A system that fails to protect victims while bending over backwards to excuse perpetrators. But here's what that system doesn't tell you. You have the right to protect yourself. You have the right to say no. You have the right to cut toxic people out of your life, even if, especially if, they're family. Your children have the right to grow up in homes free from violence and manipulation. These aren't radical ideas, though they're often treated as such. They're basic human rights. I want to tell you about the heroes in this story too, because they deserve recognition. My sister Rebecca, who dropped everything to help us, who opened her home without question, who stood by us through every court date and sleepless night. She didn't tell me I was overreacting. She didn't suggest I try to work things out. She just showed up and helped, which is what real family does. Patricia Chen, my lawyer, who fought for us with a fierce protectiveness that went beyond professional duty. She could have just processed the paperwork and collected her fee, but instead she became our advocate, our shield, our guide through a legal system that often fails abuse victims. She taught me that fighting back wasn't vindictive. It was necessary. Marcus, who came into our lives when we were still healing and never once made me feel like damaged goods. He understood that my boundaries weren't walls to keep him out, but protections to keep us safe. He respected my journey, supported my decisions, and showed Lucas what a good man actually looks like. Not someone who makes excuses for abuse, but someone who stands against it. Dr. Martinez, who helped Lucas process trauma in age-appropriate ways, who assured me that children are resilient but only when the adults in their lives do the hard work of protecting them, who never once suggested that Lucas needed his grandmother in his life, instead focusing on what he actually needed: safety, stability, and love from people who put his well-being first. Even some of David's family members who eventually found the courage to speak up, to admit they'd seen the warning signs but had been too afraid to act. It takes courage to go against family dynamics, to risk becoming the next target. Their support, even if it came late, meant something. And then there are the people who reached out after the story became public, other daughters-in-law who'd survived similar situations, parents who'd had to protect their children from toxic grandparents, adult children who'd finally gone no contact with abusive parents. They shared their stories, their strategies, their affirmations that I'd done the right thing. They formed an invisible network of support, proof that we're not alone in these battles. I think about forgiveness sometimes, not because I feel obligated to forgive Eleanor. I don't. But because people are so insistent that forgiveness is necessary for healing. But here's what I've learned. Forgiveness isn't a requirement for moving forward. You can heal without forgiving. You can build a beautiful life without absolving the people who tried to destroy it. Forgiveness, if it comes at all, has to be for you, not for them. And it certainly can't be forced or rushed or demanded by people who weren't the ones hurt. What I have found is acceptance. I accept that Eleanor is who she is. I accept that she's incapable of real love, only possession. I accept that she'll never understand what she did wrong because in her mind, she's eternally the victim. This acceptance isn't forgiveness. It's clarity. It's seeing the situation for what it really was, without rose-colored glasses or false hope for change. I also accept my own role in allowing it to continue for so long. Not in a self-blaming way, but with compassion for the person I was. I was young, in love, wanting desperately to be accepted by my husband's family. I'd been raised to be accommodating, to smooth over conflicts, to put others' needs first. These weren't character flaws. They were survival mechanisms that served me until they didn't. Learning to set boundaries, to say no, to prioritize my own safety was like learning a new language. It was hard and uncomfortable and went against everything I'd been taught, but it saved our lives. The impact on Lucas has been the hardest part to navigate. He lost not just a grandmother, but a father, an extended family, a certain innocence about the world. We've had to have age-appropriate conversations about why some people aren't safe, why love doesn't always mean letting someone be in your life, why Mommy had to make hard choices to keep us safe. He understands now, as much as a 5-year-old can understand such complex things. But he's also learned invaluable lessons. He's learned that no one has the right to hurt him, no matter who they are. He's learned that his feelings matter, that his safety is non-negotiable, that the adults in his life will protect him. He's seen that standing up to bullies is possible, even when the bully is someone who's supposed to love you. These are hard lessons for a child, but they're also protective ones. He'll grow up knowing his worth, knowing he deserves respect and safety in all his relationships. The financial impact was significant too, something people don't often talk about in these situations. Legal fees, therapy costs, security systems, moving expenses. Protecting yourself from an abuser is expensive. We went from a comfortable dual-income household paying below-market rent to a single mother paying market-rate rent while also covering legal bills. There were months when I wasn't sure how we'd make it. But the tattoo community rallied around us. Other artists sent clients my way. The shop owner gave me flexible hours when I needed to be in court. Clients who'd heard our story booked appointments specifically to support us. One regular client, a lawyer herself, even helped with some of the paperwork pro bono. It turns out that when you stand up for yourself, people who understand that struggle want to help you succeed. Now, 2 years later, we're not just surviving, we're thriving. Our apartment isn't fancy, but it's ours. The locks are solid, the windows are secure, and no one shows up uninvited. Lucas's room is covered in his artwork, dinosaur posters, and photos of our chosen family. My room has become a sanctuary, with plants in every corner and books stacked on every surface. It's peaceful in a way I didn't know homes could be. My work has evolved too. I specialize now in what I call survivor tattoos, pieces that commemorate overcoming trauma, marking new beginnings, celebrating strength. Clients come to me with their stories of survival, and together we create art that reclaims their bodies and their narratives. Every piece I create carries a little bit of our story, a reminder that we can transform our pain into something beautiful. Marcus and I are taking things slowly, building a foundation based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. He's teaching Lucas to play guitar, and they have jam sessions that mostly involve a lot of enthusiastic noise. He cooks dinner while I work late, helps with homework, and never once has suggested that his needs should come before our safety. It's a revelation, being with someone who sees boundaries as healthy rather than obstacles. Rebecca remains our rock. She and her partner are Lucas's bonus aunts, spoiling him with trips to museums and too many books. They're teaching him that family is about choice, not just blood, and that love multiplies when you share it with people who deserve it. We've even reconnected with some of David's family members, the ones who eventually stood up to Eleanor, who testified honestly during the trial, who've done their own work to break free from her influence. It's tentative, these new relationships, but it's based on truth rather than pretense. They respect our boundaries, understand why Eleanor can never be part of our lives, and are building their own relationships with Lucas separate from that history. The irony is that in trying to possess us, Eleanor lost everything. Her son moved across the country to escape her influence. Her husband divorced her. Her extended family fractured, with many choosing distance over continued drama. She sits in prison, still convinced she's the victim, while the world moves on without her. It's a tragedy of her own making, but I can't find it in myself to feel sorry for her. She had so many chances to choose differently, to seek help, to respect boundaries. She chose violence and control instead. Sometimes I dream about her. Not nightmares anymore, just dreams where she appears at the edges trying to get in. In these dreams, I'm not afraid. I simply close the door, lock it, and go back to whatever I was doing. Even my subconscious has learned that she has no power over us anymore. As I finish sharing this story with you, Lucas is at school, probably covered in finger paint and talking his teacher's ear off about pterodactyls. Tonight we'll have dinner with Marcus, and Lucas will tell us elaborate stories about his day. This weekend we're going to the farmer's market, then to the park, then who knows where else. Our life is beautifully ordinary now, full of small joys and everyday adventures. If Eleanor could see us now, it would probably kill her to know how happy we are without her. How her absence has allowed us to flourish. How every dire prediction she made about Lucas being damaged without her influence has proven false. He's kind, confident, creative, and surrounded by people who love him healthily. He's everything she said he couldn't be without her, precisely because he's growing up without her toxic influence. This is what I want you to remember if you're in a situation like mine. Leaving is possible. Safety is achievable. Happiness exists on the other side of that terrifying decision to say no more. It won't be easy. You'll doubt yourself. People will judge you. The system will fail you in ways that feel overwhelming. But keep going anyway. Find your Rebecca, your Patricia, your Marcus. Build your chosen family. Protect yourself and your children with the ferocity of a mother bear, because that's what we are when pushed to protect our cubs. Your story might not involve physical violence. It might be emotional manipulation, financial control, or psychological torture that leaves no visible scars, but abuse is abuse, and you deserve to be free from it. You deserve to wake up without dread. You deserve to make choices without fear of retaliation. You deserve love that doesn't come with conditions and control. Start small if you need to. Tell one trusted person. Document one incident. Make one phone call to a domestic violence hotline. Take one step toward freedom. That's how all journeys begin. With one step, then another, until you look back and realize how far you've come. 2 years ago, I sat in that urgent care clinic, blood seeping through a bandage, wondering how my life had come to this. Today, I sit in my peaceful apartment, preparing for another day of creating art and raising my son in safety and love. The journey between those 2 points was harrowing, but it was worth every difficult moment. You are worth the journey too. Your safety is worth the upheaval. Your children's well-being is worth the family drama. Your life is worth living free from fear and control. Don't let anyone, especially family, convince you otherwise. Because family, real family, doesn't stab you, literally or metaphorically. Real family doesn't demand you sacrifice your safety for their comfort. Real family loves you enough to respect your boundaries and support your healing. That's the lesson Eleanor never learned and probably never will. But we learned it, Lucas and I. We learned it in the hardest possible way. But we learned it, and now we're free. Thank you for listening to our story. Thank you for witnessing our journey. And if you're on your own journey to freedom, know that you're not alone. We're all out here. The survivors, the boundary setters, the ones who chose safety over family harmony. We see you, we support you, and we're proof that there's life. Beautiful, peaceful, joyful life on the other side. Stay safe. Stay strong. And remember, you deserve to be treated with respect and kindness, especially by the people who claim to love you. Accept nothing less. Your life depends on it. Mine did.